Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining today for today's webinar all about iterative exchange design, or how you can build a series of exchanges. Before I get started today, I'm going to remind you, as always, you're totally welcome to join the conversation on social media. Let us know what your key takeaways are on LinkedIn or Twitter. These are our hashtags. So hashtag TEBE and hashtag TEMasterclass. Let me introduce myself as well. So my name is Tila Beischer, and I am a customer success manager here at Thoughtexchange. I work with my partners in two ways. First, I help them to plan, execute, and action upon their successful exchanges. And then I also help them to improve adoption in their organization. So how can they drive more people using it and instituting it for really a piece of their culture? I also run this series, so the Masterclass series, every Monday, and I also run Getting Started workshops too. My objective with those two events is to show you exactly how you can actually really effectively plan your exchanges, maximize participant interest and engagement, and understand your results in a really practical and actionable way. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about iterative exchange design, or designing a series of exchanges. And what that means is that if you think about Thoughtexchange as a concept, not just as a single exchange, it's something that can transform culture in an organization, but that doesn't happen with a singular exchange. And so the big takeaway that I want you to leave this session today with is that Thoughtexchange is used to accomplish two important things. So first, to build team and organizational culture, and to achieve organizational outcomes. So to get the work that you need done, done. But this doesn't come, as I mentioned, from a single exchange. It comes from running multiple exchanges across a long period of time and having those exchanges constantly tie back to each other and be a really strong series. And the best way to do that is to really know what your purpose is. So what is that needle that you're trying to move, and what conversations do you need to have to get there? So these are the three things that we're going to talk about today to inform that process. So first, knowing and sharing your purpose. What's your why, and how does clearly communicating your why actually impact the way that people participate? The second is to understand your setting and your context. So being really clear on where your organizational context is will actually help you to know which questions to ask when. And then the third is, how do you experiment and iterate, trying new things with exchanges and building some creativity into the process. So there's a wide variety of ways for people to use Thoughtexchange, lots of different topics that you can engage upon, from live in the room exchanges, setting agendas, Q&As with panels, leadership exchanges, organization-wide exchanges, checking in on policy. I could continue going on and on for hours about all the different types of exchanges that you can run. But essentially, if you can have a conversation about it, you can have an exchange about it. And when there's so many options about what to run your exchanges about, starting with why you're running the exchanges becomes the most important. So getting really crisp on what is that progress that you want to make and how do you actually make it. And this goes beyond the exchange topic. And so you can start with the topic. Think about the fact that right now we're all working remote. For example, that's the topic, but what's the real why behind engaging upon it? And why do you want to run an exchange about it? So start with identifying, where do you need to move the needle? Is your organization in shift and transition, or are they more steady right now? Are they ready to innovate and come up with new ideas, or do you need to hear from them in order to create policies? You want to have a really clear sense of why you need to engage and what the organizational outcomes are going to be before you actually start engaging. And then another thing to consider is moving from the broad to the specific. So what I mean by that is considering kind of a larger exchange idea. So maybe something more general, like, how are you feeling about working remote right now? You're going to gather all different types of perspectives. It's not guiding or leading anything. And then building a series based on what comes up in that exchange. So what are the major themes that are coming up? Maybe there's a big theme of people feeling isolated. You can do an exchange to follow up on that, to ask people, how can we support you in feeling less isolated? What are some creative ideas that you have to come together remotely? And so the most important key takeaway from this concept of knowing your why and being really clear on it is that knowing your why helps you to be in a more proactive position. So you can plan your exchanges ahead of time, know what's coming up for 2 to 3 exchanges down the road, and then you can connect with people about that why and communicate more clearly and openly. This is exactly why we are asking you for your feedback, because we want to be able to support you in this way. The clearer that you are, the more that people will naturally want to engage with your exchanges. And then ultimately, the clearer that you are on this is that your results will be more actionable, and you'll be able to really pull from them exactly what you need. And so you've probably seen this slide before at some point in your Thoughtexchange experience, and this is talking about the 4 cultural shifts that Thoughtexchange can really do for you. So you can move from loud to crowd, from distrust to fair, blind and siloed to profound, and slow to fast. And what's really important to consider here is that none of these things happen with a single exchange. They all happen with a series of exchanges and a slow build of trust. And so if you think about the concept, let's use blind and siloed to profound as an example, because right now most people are working remotely, or many people are working remotely. And there's lots of different opinions and maybe efficiencies, workflows that are happening in silo. How can you bring those together and share them? Perhaps you want to run an exchange series about shared learning and skills in working remote. What can we bring together and share? And then once we've shared, what are our reflections upon that? And so really, I want to loop this back to this concept of the why, is that if these are the things that you need to move the needle on, how many conversations do you need to have? And not being afraid to have multiple ones. It's okay to ask people to engage multiple times. And so this is another slide that we love at Thoughtexchange too. And this is showing the pathway to transformational leadership. You can see we have a pyramid here with stabilizing, growing, and inspiring. And this is considering your organizational context. Each exchange that you run when you're considering about engaging upon a specific topic is a step towards progress and finding your results on your why. So where are you in that process of moving from loud to crowd, of distrust to trust? And this kind of shows you, considering where you are in contextually in the environment of your organization, what types of questions or conversations do you need to have to move the needle? And so this pyramid shows us how your whys can be more appropriate. So for example, setting your exchange series up according to your organizational context helps you to be seen as really empathetic and in touch. It helps people to participate in the correct conversation at the correct time. So you're addressing needs as they occur, as opposed to where you want them to be. You're really meeting participants where they're at, which will ultimately make your results more reliable. So my recommendation for using this as a resource when you're thinking about planning your own exchange series is to consider, where am I realistically on this pyramid? And if we're going to circle back to that suddenly remote example, is consider where your organization is at. Do they need some stabilizing conversations? Are they still settling into things? Is there still confusion and perhaps not clear policies? You could start with the stabilizing options, which are to deal with unexpected or systematic problems, to set realistic expectations, and to address those elephants in the room. So what are those things that aren't being shared, the side conversations that are happening that you could bring into your decision? And so what you could do here, if you're trying to work on this stabilizing step, is to start with something really broad. Reflecting on the past 4 weeks, what are the most important things to consider about working from home? Or what are the things that you want leadership to be aware of? And that exchange would reveal any conversations or points of view that need to be addressed to help your team to settle in and to stabilize with their new working environment. And it would bring to light anything that was hidden or wasn't being discussed. Then once you run that first exchange, you're able to dig in more and find out more. So you can share the results back with people. And if you find that there's more communication or questions that need to happen, don't be afraid to run a second exchange that really iterates on the first. Don't be afraid to ask what else, or to use one of those themes that comes up as inspiration to dig in deeper. Maybe we ask that question and a theme comes up about needing better office supplies. So wanting desks or chairs, something really practical and tangible. You could run an exchange about that, get a general sense of what people's setups are like and what works really well for people, and then you can develop a plan based on that. And so the second level is this growing level, and it's all about enhancing what you already have. So how can you enhance your communication and your collaboration? How can you generate enthusiasm, build relationships, and promote positive recognition of people and processes? This could be a celebrations exchange. So something along the lines of, now that we've been working remote, what shared learnings do you have that have contributed to your success recently? Or how can we have an exchange about building relationships? So how can we come together and improve our communications together while we are all working independently? And that step is really important. If you consider kind of a hierarchy of needs, first you need things to settle down to get into a routine, and then you need to acknowledge that that routine has happened. And then the final one is inspiring. And this is where you really need a high sense of trust in the process. So running exchanges ahead of one like this will help you to get really good participation and buy-in. But it's finding, where can you innovate together? So how can you crowdsource ideas to transform your culture? Maybe what ideas do you have as employees working remote to add new things to our work from home culture? How can you crowdsource ideas to challenge your own leadership assumptions and to create something new? And this is really that step where you're giving leadership to the crowd as well. It's a shared sense of leadership. And if you're building exchange series across these three and addressing all three steps, ultimately you're going to have your entire organization come together and be really productive in that shared leadership. And that's ultimately meeting that objective, or that why, of moving from loud to crowd, even in a leadership sense too. And so what I do want to point out to you as well is that when we're looking at this slide and considering a series of exchanges, not every exchange series is necessarily going to go through all three of these processes. You're not necessarily going to run one on stabilizing, one on growing, and one on inspiring. The reality is that it really depends on your organizational context. Perhaps you do need to spend more time stabilizing the conversation, or maybe you hop in and your participants are ready to start with an inspiring conversation. I wanted to share this with you as an opportunity for you to really consider leadership context and organizational environmental context to inform that series. So next we're going to talk about a really practical how-to to actually build a series. And this is kind of a step-by-step that you can use for building from one exchange to the next. And so what you can do is you can start with a broad exchange. So that example of what's on your mind and how can we help? And that would be a fairly stabilizing exchange, because we're asking people just to share what's on their mind. We're leading with empathy. We're hearing exactly what are those big, broad topics that are coming up. And then as a leader, you can work with the results, find out what those big themes are, find out where you need to dig in more. Then you can share a summary report. So make use of those summary reports to always be circling back with your participants. And then you can run your next exchange, which is a very specific exchange, digging into those themes that came up or something that's moving the needle further. And so if we're thinking again about this remote work one, which we're pulling all the way through this presentation as it's incredibly topical right now, we're starting with what's on your mind and how can we help? Maybe what we need to do next after we run that exchange is reach out and ask, based on the exchange that we ran most recently, these are the help or the support that we're willing to offer. What are your thoughts on this? And then once you implement the policy, you could run a, hey, we've been offering these supports for the past 3 or 4 weeks. What's your feedback on them? What else do you think that we need to consider? And in that way, you're using it to really project on the future. So you're asking people, what do they need? And then to reflect on what's already been changed. And you're maintaining that engagement level across the entire series of the process changes by using your thought exchanges. So those are the details that I wanted to go over today for exchange series. Typically we would do an exchange right now, but we don't have enough participants on the line today. So what I'm going to do is thank you so much for taking the time to learn a little bit more about designing an exchange series. Your customer success manager is really going to be your go-to point for helping you design that series and for coming up with things, or your account manager. So reach out to them directly, ask them any questions. You can also reach out to me, just reply to the invite email from today, or our support team as well. They're just support@thoughtexchange.com. and ask them any questions that you have. We also have masterclasses every Monday, except for next week because it's a holiday, and we do have daily Getting Started workshops. So thank you again for attending the session today, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.